I did.
Have you ever heard of a killer casually confessing to his crime right in front of the cameras, almost as if it were his victory? And even more disturbing, he admitted that keeping a 6-year-old girl alive was never about saving her, but for something far darker. In June 2022, in Louisiana, Callie, a young mother, was found dead in her home with multiple stab wounds. Her 2 daughters, a 6-year-old and 4-year-old Erin, disappeared right after. The suspect, Daniel Wayne Callahan, Callie's ex-boyfriend, was arrested in Mississippi while driving with both girls in her car. This case shocked the public not only because of his on-camera confession, but also because of the disturbing allegations about his intentions toward the 6-year-old girl. Normally, when a suspect is arrested, we can almost predict their reaction, deny everything, blame someone else, or try to justify their actions. But in this case, the paradox was chilling. On live television, when a reporter asked if he had taken the life of a 4-year-old girl, Daniel Wayne Callahan coldly replied, "I was completely sober. I did. No fear, no remorse, no excuses." When I first saw that footage, I felt a chill run down my spine. I've studied many cases and heard many confessions, but rarely have I seen someone admit to such a horrific act with this level of indifference. Instead of hiding, Callahan seemed to want the world to know who he was and what he had done. And that left me wondering, was he truly remorseful, or was he a disturbed man eager to display his crime as a trophy? Hello everyone, welcome to Crime Scene Report. I'll be your guide as we revisit cases that shock the public, not just to tell what happened, but to look deeper at what lies beneath. If you value true crime stories told with honesty and perspective, please hit subscribe. Your support is what gives us the drive to keep bringing you quality stories that shine light on the darkest corners of human behavior. In June 2022, Louisiana police received a frantic call from Callie's relatives, his ex-girlfriend. They found Callie collapsed in her home, her body covered with multiple stab wounds. The scene was devastating, but the nightmare didn't stop there. That same night, her 2 daughters vanished, one 6 years old, the other just 4. An Amber Alert went out across the state. Hours later, police spotted Callie's car being driven by Callahan. After a chase, the truth surfaced. 4-year-old Erin was gone, her body discovered in a Mississippi forest. The 6-year-old survived, but was left exhausted and deeply traumatized both physically and emotionally. What haunted me most was the reason Callahan kept the 6-year-old alive. He told police he deliberately spared her because he had other intentions. In plain words, he wanted to exploit her for his own twisted purpose. That's when I realized the death of the 4-year-old wasn't just an outburst of rage. It was part of a calculated plan, so Callahan could carry out his dark desires on the surviving sister. This truth shows the case wasn't just a family tragedy, but a chilling story of corruption and cold calculation. There's a frightening paradox here. Justice always fights to uncover the truth. Yet in this case, the truth was exposed by the criminal himself. He didn't hide it, he confessed openly, almost as if he wanted to prove his own power. That meant the investigation was no longer about who did it, but about the horror of what he had done, and what punishment could possibly fit. This is why the case drew so much media attention and sparked debate across America. Does someone who openly brags about such cruelty deserve the ultimate sentence? To me, what makes this case stand out is the reversal of the usual script. We expect police to chase suspects, build evidence, and force a confession. But here, Callahan wore his guilt like a badge, as if he wanted his crime carved into memory. And that raises a disturbing question: did he act out of hatred? Or was he driven by a sick urge to leave behind a mark of infamy? And yet this is only half the story. Because alongside Callahan was another figure, Victoria Cox. Her role in this case is almost unbelievable. It's the piece that turns this tragedy into something even darker. We'll look at her part next, to see how behind the headlines lies an even more disturbing picture. Some cases haunt us not for one detail, but for a chain of them, each piece designed to spread terror. The story of Daniel Callahan is one of those cases. It shocks not just because of the crime itself, but because every new detail painted a picture far darker than anyone first imagined. Right after Callie's body was found, the community was shaken even more by one terrifying truth: her 2 young daughters were missing. A murder was already horrifying. But when children were taken, the fear multiplied. An Amber Alert went out immediately. The girls' photos flashed on phones, on highway signs, on television screens. The whole state of Louisiana was holding its breath. I remember reading those alerts with a knot in my stomach. Where were the girls? Did they still have a chance to survive? That waiting, it crushed not just the family, but the entire community. While people prayed for answers, Callahan was behind the wheel of Callie's car, driving the 2 girls into Mississippi. It was only a 2-hour trip. But for children who had just lost their mother, it was a journey with no destination. Neighbors later said they heard children crying from inside the car racing through the night. To me, that's one of the hardest details: the sound of cries for help, that no one could stop. The car itself became a prison, a space where fear grew heavier with every passing minute. When police in Jackson finally caught Callahan, they weren't just arresting a suspect. They were bracing for the worst. And soon their fears came true. 4-year-old Aaron was found in the woods, lifeless. I won't describe what investigators saw. The truth alone is unbearable. What haunted me was their description of the scene: a quiet forest, where a small life ended in loneliness. Just hearing that image is enough to break your heart. But the most disturbing detail was why Callahan kept the 6-year-old alive. He didn't spare her out of mercy. He spared her for a twisted purpose. In official records, he admitted he wanted to turn her into a sex slave, an idea he had carried long before. This wasn't sudden rage. It was planned, calculated, and that's what turned this case from tragedy into nightmare. Her survival wasn't luck. It was only because his plan wasn't finished. And then came even darker discoveries. At a place where Callahan had lived, police found small metal cages, the kind used for animals. It left one terrifying question: was he planning to lock victims inside? We may never know. But just the existence of those cages was enough to paint the picture of a house of horrors, waiting for innocent children. And then came Victoria Cox, a 33-year-old woman who, instead of trying to save the children, was accused of standing with Callahan. Not just being there, she was alleged to have taken part in the abuse of the 6-year-old. That was the second shock to the public. Society often associates women with care and protection. But here, her role was the complete opposite, and that contradiction made the case even more horrifying. Each detail painted the picture darker: the cries in the night, the death of a child in the woods, the cages found in the old house, and now a woman's complicity. This wasn't just about a mother whose life was taken. It was a reminder of how fragile children are when faced with predators who carry such evil intent. And maybe that's why this case still haunts so many people. Because it left behind images no one can erase. As these truths came out, all eyes turned to the courtroom. People wanted to know, what would justice do with a man who ended one child's life and plotted to enslave her sister? Callahan faced charges on 3 levels. In Louisiana, first-degree murder and kidnapping. In Mississippi, charges tied to Aaron's death and the assault on the 6-year-old. And federally, the harshest of all: kidnapping, resulting in death, and transporting children across state lines. Under federal law, the death penalty was very real. The climax came when Callahan suddenly pled guilty in federal court to avoid execution. In return, he got life in prison, no parole. Legally, a strategy, but for many not true justice. Because how do you balance crimes like his with just a sentence? And yet, Louisiana and Mississippi can still try him. The death penalty is not completely off the table. If Callahan was the center of rage, Victoria Cox was the wound that cut deeper. 33 years old, accused not only of helping, but of joining in. She cried in court, denying it as prosecutors read the charges. But the public wasn't moved. If convicted, she too could face the harshest punishment. Her presence in this story is the most painful contradiction. A woman expected to protect standing with evil instead. From my personal perspective, what haunts me most is the fate of the 6-year-old girl, the only surviving witness. She is not just the one who lived through it. She is also the key to justice. But for justice to be served, she may have to take the stand. She may have to relive every horrific memory. And I've thought about this, if a plea deal could spare her from that trauma. Maybe that's the most humane choice. Because no sentence, no prison term, no punishment can ever heal the scars left on a child like her. That's why the Callahan case doesn't really end with his confession. It ends with questions. Still unanswered. Will justice stop at life without parole or move toward the death penalty? How will society protect the survivors? And most importantly, how do we stop predators like this from striking again? The echoes of this case remain. It's not just another crime story. It's a warning. Sometimes the monster isn't a stranger, it's someone who once walked right through the door of a family. And when justice finally speaks, what matters most isn't just the years in a sentence, it's making sure no child ever has to live this nightmare again. What lingers is not only shock at the crime, but the emptiness it leaves behind. A mother gone, a 4-year-old lost forever, and a 6-year-old carrying memories that may haunt her for life. Justice will punish Callahan and Victoria Cox. But can any verdict ever truly balance such loss? To me, this case is a bitter reminder. Violence and perversion can arise, even in the relationships we think we know. We may not always see someone's true self, but we can learn to recognize the warning signs, threats, control, repeated aggression. If exposed early, if someone spoke up, maybe this tragedy would not have reached such cruelty. That's the lesson I take from this. Never stay silent in the face of violence, because every silence only feeds the next tragedy. And now I want to hear from you. If you were on the jury, would you choose life in prison or the death penalty for Callahan? Share your thoughts in the comments. Every opinion matters, because it's not just about justice, it's about keeping our communities safe. And if you found value in this analysis, please subscribe to Crime Scene Report. Your support gives us the strength to keep telling these stories.